Welcome back, everyone. We have a fantastic card here to break down. UFC 263, two title fights, three rematches, a big step up in the quality of the fights, and rightfully so. This is a numbered card. And before we get any further, please hit that like and subscribe. We fell a little short last week. The goal still is 100 subs, so please help me out there. I really do appreciate it. And without further ado, let's get right into the recaps. So as far as official picks go, I only went 5 of 11. And as far as bets go, I did lose 0.33 units on the night. The straight picks didn't come through whatsoever. Whiffed on all three of them. It was really the props that ended up saving me from having an absolutely shitty night. Turned it into just a mildly shitty night. So yeah, let's get right into it. I mean, right off the bat, I just got to address this one. Dasko Todorovic, Gregory Rodriguez. So I did end up putting a 1 unit play on Todorovic. And, obviously in hindsight, pretty bad play. Going into this one, I did say that if it kind of dropped to like about minus 135, 130 or so, I might take a shot on him. And, ultimately I just felt that the offensive striking of Todorovic would have been a bit much for Rodriguez. I felt that Rodriguez, at least from what I've seen on the regional tape, is a bit slow, and Todorovic would have a lot of success with his offensive striking, but obviously that wasn't the case. The concern really was for Todorovic that he keeps his hands down, uses a lot of head movement to evade shots, but I felt that, as far as his offensive, striking goes, he should be able to keep up with Rodriguez there, but clearly that wasn't the case. I did not expect Rodriguez to pretty much just outclass him on the feet, and I'm not sure how many people saw that as well. I mean, obviously the knockout was on the table there, but to just get completely outclassed for 3 rounds was a bit shocking to me. And ultimately, it was a bad play in the fact that I guess I had a pretty bad read on Rodriguez. And just putting money on Todorovic is just not a great idea. The guy has been pretty underwhelming so far. And, I didn't agree with his, kind of game plan, obviously, going into that fight. Aside from the lack of head, or not lack of head movement, but the bad defense, I thought Todorovic would be able to put it on Rodriguez a bit more. I feel that if you have a short notice opponent coming in, you have to really make him work. You really have to put the pace on him and take advantage of the fact that you had a full camp. And I think there was another fight that happened in recent memory. I believe it was the Matt Schnell fight where Schnell, I don't remember his opponent, I'm blanking on it right now, but his opponent was coming in short notice and he failed to really set a pace on him and kind of just let his opponent fight at his own pace, let his opponent dictate the pace, even though he was coming in short notice. And I feel like that's kind of what happened here as well. He let Rodriguez dictate the pace, even though Rodriguez was the one coming in on short notice here. So I just feel that Todorovic going forward, he's got a lot of work to do, and I really don't think I'll be betting him anymore until he's shown some major improvement. And yeah, that was a pretty bad bet. No way else to put it. And then moving along, I did have a 2 unit bet on Baeza over Ponzinibbio. So I just thought that Ponzinibbio, still, with a bit of ring rust, I think he'd be liable to give up that first round. And so I felt that for Baeza, that was a really good opportunity for him. If he could bank that first round, that he could very easily, well, not very easily, but it put him in a good position to potentially bank another round. And, he did look really good that first round, but Ponzinibbio, I mean, the guy just showed tremendous heart, tremendous grit in that fight. I don't think this was too bad of a bet. I think that if Baeza was able to mix it up a little bit more, he could have edged one of those 2 rounds, but yeah, he was really going to the well with those leg kicks. I know he was having success early in the fight, but after a certain point, you do have to start making him respect you a little more. It was very clear that Ponzinibbio, he was just going to eat those leg kicks and keep moving forward. And, props to him. He showed a lot of determination that fight, and that's something that definitely is a factor in a lot of these fights where I think he had a lot more to prove this fight as opposed to Baeza, who, he's still up and coming, has a little more wiggle room in terms of taking a loss. And, Ponzinibbio this late in his career, his back's up against the wall here. He has to get the W. So, props to him for being able to gut it out. And, overall, not a completely terrible bet, but, not a great one either. So pretty mad bet, honestly. And then the other one that fell through was the use of Zalal, Sean Woodson. I did put a 1 unit bet on Zalal. I just felt that on the feet, he could have been able to keep it close, but I expected Zalal to have a little bit more success with his wrestling, and this is actually something I touch up on in one of my later breakdowns, in regards to, well-rounded fighters looking to wrestle. With Zalal, he's not a really high-level wrestler, so for him to really have success with the wrestling, he'll need to set it up much better. And this is, I believe, the second fight in a row I've seen him really just look to dive in on the opponent's hips and just hold him against the cage, which, that's very, it's pretty low level in my opinion. He needs to set it up a bit more with the striking, and I think that if, he was able to do that, he'd be able to get the fight to the ground, where I think Woodson's ground game is pretty awful, honestly, but he wasn't able to really get any sort of, I think he only landed one takedown, I think, and really wasn't able to do much with it because I think it was the end of the round. Anyways, I think we're starting to see really the limitations of Zalal. He's a very solid, well-rounded fighter, but, against anyone who's a bit better than him in any department, he will struggle a bit. And unless he just is able to completely outclass him in one of his other, strengths like his, grappling or his striking, he's going to have a really hard time in the UFC beating guys who are UFC caliber. And, he's really just a decision fighter. So he'll have to have a pretty clear advantage somewhere for me to have to bet him moving forward. That being said, I don't think this was a completely terrible bet because I do think that Zalal played it pretty close. And, if he was able to get just one more takedown, I think that he could very well have stolen another round, and it would have made, the plus 165 play look pretty solid. I definitely don't think that Woodson looked like a minus, 200 favorite in there at all. So yeah, not too bad of a bet in my opinion, and not one I'm too upset about. And then moving into the props, which really just salvaged the night. I had Tybura round 1 knockout, just 0.2 units there because I really felt like that was his win condition, and it did look like he might have had Tybura in some trouble early there, but really that really is Harris's win condition. It's round 1 knockout or bust. I'd go as far as to say he's first 2.5 minute knockout or bust because the guy's cardio is just not there. His defensive grappling is not there. The guy just is completely lost if you're able to get his hands on there or on him. And, at plus 400, I still feel like that was decent, solid, value play there. If you have Tybura or if you have Harris at, plus 150 money line or so, I think that the round 1 knockout prop should only be around plus 200, plus 210 tops, just because really that's his win condition. I don't think he's winning it any other way. So yeah, that's that. And, I feel like he really needs a big step down in competition. They should just feed him someone like, Maurice Green or something to give him a good bounce back win. And moving along, though, the other prop that I didn't cash on was Staropoli to win by decision. In hindsight, it was pretty bad. I mean, Staropoli, very bad defensive grappling, and, he was coming in pretty undersized that fight. I expected his footwork and speed to play a bit more of a factor, look to really kind of maybe punish Dolidze coming in, but obviously that completely just did not work. Dolidze was able to just wall install him pretty much the whole fight, and Dolidze just won on the basis of just having control time, didn't really do much damage. But, that was actually pretty bad there. I knew full well the weaknesses of Staropoli going in there, but at those plus odds, I wanted to take a shot there on Staropoli. And moving right along, where we did have some success was Montana De La Rosa versus Ariane Lipski. I had De La Rosa to win inside the distance. I did mention it on the podcast last week. With how bad Lipski's takedown defense is and how bad her ground game is, I think that De La Rosa, if she's going to have a lot of top time on her, and if she's going to have that much top time, she's going to be able to find a finish there either by submission or just ground and pound knockout. And yeah, she was able to get it done in there. Not really surprised at all by that outcome. The other one I did have was a 0.25 unit shot on Puelles to win by decision. And this was one I was going pretty back and forth on all week. The line definitely felt wide throughout the whole week. I don't think that Levitt is or should have been that big of a favorite, but at the same time, I was never quite confident in Puelles either. The guy has looked pretty awful in pretty much all of his fights. So I just took a quarter of a unit stab there. to win by decision, just because I don't think he's going to be submitting Levitt, and I definitely don't think he'll be knocking him out. The only way he does get a win is, if it's a very just grindy sort of decision there, and that's exactly what happened. Most of that fight was on the ground. Not a lot of action, and not even a very high-level grappling fight. I don't know why anyone's saying that this is high-level grappling. It very much isn't. It's pretty low-level grappling, very low volume, very low action grappling there. Levitt just was content to play off his back, and he wasn't even really doing much. He wasn't really hurting Puelles, and he wasn't really attacking submissions either. So Levitt got exposed big time there. I'd be surprised if he came in as a favorite in any future fights. And in hindsight, I probably could have put half a unit or so on this instead of just a quarter of a unit. But at the time, I just was really shaky on Puelles. I think that at any point in that fight, if Levitt could have potentially swept Puelles, he could have stolen the round. So, maybe could have upped the bet amount a little bit more, but, not too upset with not doing it just because I feel that Puelles is a very low level as well. And then lastly, I did take a half unit shot on Latifi to win by decision. And, I did pick Movsar to win, but, I hadn't looked into his regional tape at the moment or at the time when I was doing the podcast. And when I did, it did not look good at all. I mean, Movsar, his takedown defense is decent, but if you are able to get him to his back, the guy has absolutely nothing off his back. And coming out of this fight, it doesn't look like that's part of his game that was worked on whatsoever, because Latifi was able to hold him and had a lot of control time, had a lot of success on top, while Movsar was kind of just on his back, a bit lost in there. So, I just figured that if Latifi was able to get a couple takedowns, he could very easily just win around that way. And that's exactly what happened. Half unit shot there. Was able to cash on that. And lastly, we had a no contest for one leg of our parlay. So Mason Jones, Alan Patrick, not much to say there. Mason Jones was on his way to absolutely steamrolling Patrick in there, but Patrick looked for a way out. Not super upset about it or anything, just kind of disappointing as a fan and obviously as a bettor. But I definitely feel that set a bit of a precedent, and I don't know how I feel about that. Yeah, I did win a few units off of that, but it definitely seems like there's been an uptick of people just looking for a way out. So anyways, no contest there, and now I just have Leon Edwards. Basically just have him straight at this point. So instead of winning 2.5 units, I'll probably only be getting a unit off that play. But it is what it is. This stuff happens. Anyways, that'll do it for the recap. Again, it went on a bit longer than I had wanted it to. Going forward, I'm not sure if I should maybe just make a separate video for the recaps or just continue to stick it in the front here and slap on the timestamp. So let me know what you guys think about that. But without further ado, let's get right into UFC 263. And moving right along, we have Carlos Felipe versus Jake Collier, and Felipe is the minus 260 favorite. Comeback on Collier is plus 225, and this is a low-level heavyweight fight. You guys know how I feel about this, especially how the line is set at right now. It's off. It's way off in my opinion. I don't think Felipe should be this big of a favorite against anyone. So. This is still early in the week. I'm recording this on June 1st, so this line I have a feeling will close up. I'd be surprised if Collier doesn't dip below plus 150 here. But going into fight week, I do expect this line to get hammered. Anyways, diving right into the matchup here. So Felipe, he's got quick hands for his size. Good combination striking, mixes it up pretty well. We'll throw a few kicks in there as well, but. My biggest issue with him, one of the biggest issues I have with him is, has large moments of inactivity where he'll kind of just stand and look to maybe even taunt his opponents. But when he does go, he'll put together, really nice combinations. We'll throw some volume, but really it's in spurts. So he'll have a good chunk of time where he'll just be kind of just staring at his opponent and looking to kind of egg him on a bit. But, especially in the first round where I feel like he starts a little bit slower as well. He does pick it up later in the fight, but that first round is it's really slow starter for him, basically. And, he's a bit hittable as well. And the other thing I really don't like about him is he doesn't really have much of a grappling game. Spivak really was able to have a lot of success with the grappling, but, I can't hold that against him too much. Spivak is a pretty solid heavyweight, pretty solid, grappler as well. But, even Tafa was having success holding him against the cage, and to a certain extent, Yorgan De Castro was as well. So his defensive grappling is, definitely something his opponents can exploit. But, fortunately for him, though, Collier is not like a grapple-heavy fighter. He's primarily a stand-up guy as well. And, he's been fighting for a while, but, he did take a really long layoff, about a 3-year layoff. And as far as, fighting at heavyweight goes, he's only had 2 fights there. And there's really not much to go off of because in his first fight at heavyweight, he went up against Aspinall and pretty much got, he got dropped early in that fight. I don't think he landed a single strike. And, it was actually a really weird knockout. He got clipped, kind of got crumpled, and pretty much just shelled up. I don't think he was out cold or anything, but I don't think he wanted to keep fighting there. And, this was after a near 3-year layoff against a really hot prospect in Aspinall. So I don't think the guy was ready at all for that fight. And in his second fight, he got matched up with Jean Vellante, where he gave a much better account of himself. But, this isn't a fight that you could really take too much from either, because this was the same Jean Vellante that had a heart attack against Maurice Green. And so while he did look good against him, I can't take too much from that performance. But as far as what he did show, or what he did do well in that fight, was he put on a pretty solid performance. Had a very nice mixed varied attack against Vellante. Good leg kicking game, mixed it up really well on the feet, put on a pretty high pace as well, and was able to take a good amount of damage from Vellante. Not good in the sense that, he was quite hittable that fight, but he was able to gut it out, didn't quit in there, was able to, go the full distance. Got busted open pretty bad, but, his chin held up, and he did put on quite a clinic on Vellante. But taking a look at this matchup, I feel that the line is way off here. I think this fight is going to be pretty competitive, honestly, and I've already taken a 0.75 unit shot on Collier, and just out of principle, but before anyone gets on my case for just blindly fading Felipe, or just taking a dog shot on these lower level heavyweight fights, which honestly isn't a terrible strategy. But as far as this matchup goes, I think that Collier actually has a pretty good shot of winning. And on the feet, I think that even though Felipe is likely gonna have quicker hands, might be a little bit quicker in there, I think that the volume of Collier can definitely give some issues to Felipe, and could definitely sway the judges, or sway the judges in his favor. And I just think that I don't think that Collier will look to grapple with Felipe, but there's definitely that opportunity for him to. And if he does go there, I think that he'll be a pretty significant favorite, because I think that on the feet it should play out pretty closely, and if he does go to his grappling, he'll have quite a bit of success there, honestly. And while I did take Felipe against Tafa in his previous fight, I definitely don't think that he looked like as big of a favorite as he was lined at going into that fight. And honestly, if you look at his resume, it's not even that good, because he made his UFC debut against Sergey Spivak. So again, he got pretty thoroughly dominated on the ground there. Can't hold that against him too much, making his UFC debut against a pretty solid grappler in Spivak, who could potentially be a mainstay in the heavyweight division at this point, and is a pretty solid fighter. Then he gets matched up with Yorgan De Castro, where he comes in as a big underdog, was able to cash there, but De Castro is really not that good. And I don't even know if he's still at the organization anymore, but the guy pretty much just went, I think, 1-3 or 1-4 in the UFC. So I wouldn't be surprised if, he's out of the UFC at this point. And in his most recent fight, he got matched up with Justin Tafa, who, as it turns out, is a complete fraud. And he was able to take Felipe to a split decision there. So he, I guess, kind of overperformed a bit against De Castro and completely underperformed against Tafa. But the fact of the matter is the guy was in a close fight with Yorgan De Castro and Justin Tafa, who are very low-level guys. And, say what you will about Jake Collier, the guy's actually fought at the UFC level, albeit at a much lower weight class. The guy's completely ballooned up, but, he's still got skills. And I just feel that at the end of the day, this is going to be a pretty close fight. Like, on the feet, I think it should play out closely. I think that, if anything, Collier will be the one with the better striking. But, I could be wrong here. Maybe Felipe is better, but definitely not minus 250 better. And there's always that big hole in Felipe's grappling defense that can be exploited. Again, I don't expect Collier to do it, but he could always just end the round with the takedown and possibly just sway the round in his favor just by doing that. So again, on the feet, I think that the volume of Collier will be enough to keep it close. And then if he does decide to implement a tiny bit of grappling, I think he could make this a very close and winnable fight for him. So yeah, I got Collier to win this, and I might even put an extra unit on Collier because I just feel this line is completely off. And, unless Felipe just goes out there and starches Collier, I think that this is going to be a pretty close fight. And yeah, unless this is a complete blowout, which I really don't think it is, this won't be a terrible bet at all. I think that, honestly, come fight week, I think the line will close up quite a bit more, and I wouldn't be completely surprised if the line closed near pick'em. And again, I am recording this pretty early. This is June 1st right now, so about like a week and a half before, fight day. But if anyone is interested in potentially tailing bets, just, follow me on Bet MMA Tips, because I pretty much lock in the bets, or I post my bets as soon as, I lock them in. And before anyone complains about me posting unbettable lines, this line's kind of been here. It's been holding for like a good solid week. So it does look like a little bit of money is starting to come in on Collier, but as of right now, you can still get him at the lowest plus 200 right now. And in some books, you can still get plus 225. So really solid value on Collier right now. And just to wrap up, because it looks like I kind of went a little too long on this, I'm going to take Collier here, and I might actually put another unit on Collier once I'm done recording this. I really hope this doesn't blow up in my face, but I really don't think that Felipe is really all that dangerous on the feet, and his output is a little spotty at best. So in conclusion, I got Collier here, and likely will be putting 1.75 unit bet on him. And moving right along, we have Ziam versus Luigi Vendramini, and this one is near a pick'em right now. Ziam can be had for minus 115 and Vendramini for minus 105. And this is going to be a pretty quick breakdown just because there's not a ton of tape on either guy, and both guys have, been off of, or both guys have had pretty long layoffs. So starting with Ziam first, so he's a pretty solid striker. Supposedly was, a K1 champ. He's got very heavy leg kicks, is pretty good at pumping the jab out, but, on the feet, he's not super high output, but, I don't think it's a really big detriment to him. He will throw, and, those leg kicks really do make an impact. And, he's got a bit of that tall man's defense as well, so that's definitely something that, his opponents can exploit going forward. His defensive grappling is a little questionable. He was held up against the cage for pretty much the whole fight against Don Madge. And, it did look like it improved a bit against Malarkey, but he did struggle against Malarkey a bit in terms of the grappling. But it definitely looked like it has improved. He was able to actually, sweep Malarkey, and, he was able to fight his way back to the feet. But that definitely is something that could potentially be exploited, although he's gotten a lot better at actually keeping the fight standing. Ziam is still pretty young, so I do expect him to continue to make improvements fight to fight. And his opponent, Vendramini, also pretty limited tape on him. He came in short notice against Zaleski dos Santos and, was able to backpack him for a bit in that first round, but he did get knocked out in the second round. He ate a flying knee, and that actually didn't put him out right away. He was actually, I think, still conscious, but it was the follow-up shots that got him. And so that wasn't a fight I was really able to get much from. I believe he was coming in short notice that fight against a pretty solid fighter in Zaleski dos Santos. So not something that I can put too much weight on. And, in his fight against Jason Ayari most recently, he got him out of there in like the first minute of the fight. So wasn't really able to get much from that either, but from the very limited tape that I have seen from Vendramini, it does look like he moves pretty well on the feet, is able to mix up his attacks pretty well, and, does seem to have decent counter punching. I've seen him actually look to wrestle in both of those fights, but he really didn't have a ton of success there, so I really don't know how good his wrestling or grappling is. And, as far as this matchup goes, it's really hard for me to pick a side here just because there's very limited tape on both fighters, but if you had to press me for a side, I will have to side with Ziam here just because I think he is a little bit more technical on the feet. He is the taller guy as well, so I think he's going to be able to have a lot more success at distance. Furthermore, I just feel that Vendramini, he did have a really long layoff, and I believe it was due to an injury, and I don't think that that fight back against Ariari was really enough to shake off the rust, if there was any at all. So that's just a little bit of a factor there. But, all in all, I just think this fight really could go either way. So as far as a pick goes, I'm just going to go with Ziam here, but, very low confidence. And as far as, betting tips go, I wouldn't really recommend betting this fight just because, yeah, again, there's really limited tape on either guy, and both guys are really young. Both guys could be making some crazy improvements too, so I don't really see much value here. So as far as betting goes, I'm probably just going to look to pass on this fight. Moving right along, we have Steven Peterson versus Chase Hooper, and right now this fight is sitting at a pick'em, minus 110 both ways. Peterson, his striking is very underwhelming from what I've seen so far. Very basic. He looks to lower his head and just start swinging sometimes. Doesn't seem to have much power either, so it's not like if he connects, he's putting someone out. From what I've seen, he does appear primarily to be a grappler. He uses his wild striking usually to kind of just close the distance, but I don't think he's really had much grappling success at the UFC level either. He's really struggles to hold opponents down, and he does have a number of wins on the regional scene, but his only wins in the UFC are by a split decision and a very fluky spinning back fist in a fight where he was very soundly losing. I mean, I'm pretty sure he was on his way to getting cut after that fight, but that spinning back fist just completely saved his UFC career. But overall, I just don't think Peterson's that good, whether it's on the feet or standing, or on the feet or on the ground. His opponent Hooper, oh my God, Chase Hooper's right off the bat. This guy is extremely hittable, very slow and awkward on the feet. Does not move his head off the center line whatsoever. The guy, any half decent striker could pretty much piece this kid up. Fortunately for him, Peterson's not even that good on the feet. So I really don't think Peterson is going to be able to take advantage of Hooper's poor striking defense. I'd say the only bright spot so far in Hooper's striking is really his kicks. He's able to time those pretty well, uses his long legs and reach very well on the feet, but outside of that, there's not much to like as far as the stand-up game goes. He's able to get countered pretty easily because he's really slow, and a lot of his movement is pretty telegraphed. I do have to say, he has pretty solid jiu-jitsu. Is very fluid on the ground, very sneaky there, very crafty, but his wrestling is pretty bad. He's not really that strong either, so it's not like he's able to just muscle opponents to the ground. And I remember in both the fights against Caceres and Barrett, I did look to fade him. I took a small shot on both of his opponents because I felt that going into those fights, his striking defense, again, very big liability, and if he's not able to get the fight to the ground, he's going to get pieced up. And the Barrett fight didn't go my way, but that was a fight that Hooper was on his way to losing before he was able to lock in that heel hook. And I feel that bookies definitely are starting to wisen up to it a bit because, in both those fights, his opponents were pretty heavy favorite, or he was a pretty heavy favorite. Both of his opponents were pretty big dogs in those fights, and he kind of got exposed in both of those fights. And now they're starting to kind of catch on a bit. Peterson, I think he opened as a much bigger favorite. Now it's like money's been coming in on Hooper. But yeah, the game plan is out there. Just look to keep the fight standing, and you'll likely have a lot of success on the feet. But, going into this matchup, I really don't know if Peterson's going to be the guy, especially at these odds. I don't know if Peterson's really worth the shot here unless you're getting like solid plus money, because here's something to consider. In both of his previous fights against Caceres and Barrett, I'd say both of those guys are better opponents than Steven Peterson, and for some reason you're getting worse odds on Peterson than you are on those other two fighters. I guess you could argue that Peterson, he does have the grappling base, so he'll be able to stay safe against Hooper and likely just piece him up, but I just don't think that Peterson's striking is quite on their level. I don't think he'll be able to take advantage of Hooper's striking defense as much as the other two, and honestly, I just don't think that Peterson's that good on the ground either. I think Hooper, if he's able to get his hands on him, if Hooper's in a dominant position, I do think that Hooper will likely be able to have a lot of success on the ground. I don't know if he's going to finish Peterson, but I wouldn't be completely surprised if he did. So, as far as a pick goes, I think I'm going to go with the Hooper here. I think that on the feet, he can definitely keep it competitive. Supposedly, he's been training with Wonder Boy, and, I'm not going to put too much stock into that, but I think that even if he shows up at the same skill level he was in his last fight, I think he could definitely still make it competitive because, once again, I really don't think Peterson is going to be the guy to really take advantage of Hooper's defensive tendencies. And on the ground, I do actually favor Hooper a little bit more. So, yeah, the pick here for me is Hooper. And, I don't know if I'll bet this fight, especially where it is now. I think either side is playable if you can get a good plus money on there. I think Chase Hooper, back when he was like plus 150, was, decent value play. And then as far as Steven Peterson goes, yeah, I'd probably need like plus 150 or so for me to want to take a shot on him. But as it stands now, I think there's not much value on each side. Frank Camacho, and Frevola is going to be the minus 205 favorite. Comeback on Camacho is plus 175. And Frevola, he's got pretty wild striking, honestly. He does throw pretty heavy leg kicks, and a lot of the time he's just looking for the power shot, but I feel that he's really just trying to close the distance so he could get the takedown. On the feet, he is pretty hittable as well. But, his wrestling is pretty solid. Will attack the single leg and can be pretty relentless with the takedowns. Will occasionally look to hold opponents up against the fence as well. However, once he's able to get his opponents down, though, his top control isn't particularly great. I've seen opponents periodically just get back to their feet pretty quickly, and, I've seen him get swept as well. So, just overall, I don't think he's a particularly great fighter because on the feet, I don't think his striking is that great. And while his wrestling is solid, his top control isn't that good. So a lot of the time, he's just looking to take opponents down or really just look to wall install. Whereas with Camacho, he's got pretty good striking, good clinch striking as well, a solid clinch game. Does have a trip that he likes to go to in the clinch as well. However, his cardio is a little bit questionable as he starts to slow down in fights, and he has taken a ton of damage as well, especially in fights that do get dragged on. As he starts to tire a bit, he basically just becomes a sitting duck out there. Especially in the second and third rounds when he really starts to tire and just takes a ton of damage in those fights. That said, I do think he is still a pretty dangerous striker, although he hasn't had a very good UFC run. But I do have a feeling that Camacho might be on a bit of a decline. Well, I know he is on a bit of a decline, but I think he might potentially be washed, which is why the line is the way it is. Like in his last fight against Justin James, I don't think that James really should have had any business knocking him out, and that knockout loss could potentially be the nail in the coffin for Camacho's UFC career. I don't want to completely, write him off after that performance, but Camacho has taken a ton of damage, in the UFC. And, he's only 32, but in terms of fight years, he could potentially be like 37, 38. But, assuming that he isn't completely washed, he could make this a pretty competitive fight because, like I said before, I do think that Camacho has pretty solid striking. He could make this pretty close on the feet. I just don't think that Frevola is that good of a striker. However, again, the cardio of Camacho is always a big concern here. And, if Frevola is able to go to his grappling early, I think that he could tire Camacho out quite a bit. So, yeah, I do have to lean towards Frevola here, although I definitely feel the line is a bit wide. However, I feel that's completely predicated on whether or not Camacho's washed. And if he is, Frevola could look like the minus 205 favorite here, but if he isn't, I definitely think that Camacho could make this a very competitive fight. And if anything, I think that on the feet, he could potentially knock Frevola out. I mean, Frevola, he has been knocked out before, and he has been hurt in a few of his fights. So I think that Camacho could definitely catch Frevola, but I do have to lean towards the grappling of Frevola here. I think that, especially as the fight goes on, Frevola is going to have a pretty good chance of getting the W here. However, as far as bets go, I don't think I'll be touching this fight. I don't really want to lay minus 205 on Frevola, who I think is a very middling fighter, but at the same time, I don't think that Camacho, at this stage in his career, is really worth taking a shot on. I mean, he could pull through here, but at the same time, he could just be completely done. So, I think I'm going to stay away from this fight, but again, the pick here is Frevola. Pannie Kianzad versus Alexis Davis, and Kianzad's the minus 210 favorite. Come back on. Davis is plus 180, and Kianzad, her striking is pretty solid, uses the jab pretty well, is able to mix up her combinations pretty well. Also, her work rate is also pretty solid. And as far as power goes, I mean, she's got decent power, obviously all relative to the division, but, you know, it does look like some of her punches do have a bit of sting on him. Her takedown defense does seem decent, but, you know, she hasn't really fought a legit grappler, in my opinion. She's looked pretty solid so far, and her only losses are to decent prospects in Julia Avila and Macy Chiasson. So overall, I'd say she's a pretty solid mid-level fighter at this point. Still somewhat improving, though. That being said, though, she's still pretty young and should have a bit of upside here. Whereas with Davis, she's a bit of a veteran of the sport at this point. She's a bit slower, but she's still very crafty. The athleticism isn't quite there anymore, but it does look like her timing and technique is. You know, I'd say in her previous fights against Araujo, Chukagi, and even Jennifer Maia, she was still very competitive in those fights. And, you know, she arguably could have won those as well. And, you know, she is coming off of a win against Sabrina Mazo where she was able to use her grappling to steal the fight. And that really showed some veteran IQ there. She was able to keep it close on the feet and eventually use her grappling to just steal the rounds. And taking a look at this matchup, I definitely feel the line is wide. I do favor Kianzad a bit more on the feet, but, you know, not even by a crazy margin. I think that as far as the striking goes, I think that Davis can keep it somewhat competitive. However, if it's a 15-minute, you know, boxing match, I do think Kianzad will win pretty clearly. Although I do think that if Davis is able to mix in the wrestling, I do think that she could potentially win the decision here. So yeah, if Davis is able to keep it competitive on the feet and then just mix in the wrestling at the end of the rounds to, you know, secure a bit of control time, I definitely think that she could sway the scoring in her favor. The big concern with Davis, though, is she does have a ton of scar tissue. She doesn't wear damage well at all and gets cut open pretty easily, which honestly is why I think she might have lost those close fights in her most, you know, last few losses. I think it's just because, you know, her face just looked completely busted up in a lot of those fights. But as far as how those matchups played out, she was able to hang with some pretty solid fighters in Araujo, Maia, and Chukagian. But as far as this matchup goes, I think that it could potentially play out pretty similar to her Mazo fight. I think that on the feet, she'll look to, you know, keep it competitive and then use the end of the rounds to just secure a takedown and look to grind out Kianzad to finish the round. And like I said before, I don't think that Kianzad has terrible takedown defense. I think it's actually pretty solid, but I have seen her, you know, held on her back before. I believe in the Eubanks fight, Eubanks had a lot of success in round one, just holding her, just keeping her on her back. And I think the issue with that fight for Eubanks was her cardio. She wasn't able to sustain that sort of grappling attack for too long. And, you know, it was very clear that she was looking to get the fight to the ground. And it became much easier to defend that way. Whereas with Davis, I think she's definitely got the veteran savvy to really time those takedowns a lot better, look to keep it standing, and then mix it in as opposed to just making it very obvious that you want to get the fight to the ground. I think when you're not a great wrestler, like I don't think Davis is a great wrestler, you want to use like the element of surprise or really just look to catch your opponent off guard and time that, you know, level change. Because a lot of the time, you know, if you're striking and they're not expecting it, they're not going to be properly defending it. Whereas if they know that you're going to be constantly shooting for the takedown, they'll be much more wise to it. They'll keep their hands low. They'll be able to sprawl a lot easier. So yeah, just don't telegraph the takedowns. And I don't think that she will, because she did a really good job of mixing it up against Mazo. And I think in this fight, Davis will probably, you know, keep the fight standing for the first 3 or 4 minutes, really get Kianzad in there comfortable, you know, in her striking stance, and then just look to time that level change in like the last minute and a half or so, and look to steal the round that way like she did against Mazo. So yeah, I feel like there is a very clear path to victory here for Davis, and Kianzad off her back just did not look that great. So I think that Davis could definitely do enough on the ground to really secure the round. And, I already have a 0.5 unit bet placed on Davis here. And I don't know if I want to put more, just because I feel that the line isn't completely egregious. I do favor Kianzad a bit more on the feet. And if she is able to keep it standing, I think she wins pretty comfortably. So I don't think there's like crazy value here, but I do think there is some value. I think I might just look to play Davis by decision when the props come out for that as well. Maybe put another half unit or quarter unit shot on there. But yeah, I feel this is just a really winnable fight for Davis. And Davis, she has shown some pretty good ring IQ and some veteran savvy in there. So I think she's got a good shot in this. And so as far as the pick goes, obviously I'm going to go with Davis here. And I do have a half a unit bet placed on Davis. In the next fight, we have Hakeem Dawodu versus Movsar Evloev. And Evloev's the minus 250 favorite. Comeback on Dawodu is plus 210. And pre-tape, I felt the line might have been a little wide. I thought that maybe Evloev might be a little overrated, and Dawodu might have been a bit underrated coming into this matchup. But, after doing tape, I kind of see why it is lined this way. I think it is actually pretty justified. If anything, I think that Dawodu might be a little overrated. I know he's the underdog, but I'm just talking in a general sense. I think he gets a lot more love than he really should. Because honestly, Dawodu, he's not a bad fighter by any means, but I just haven't really been that impressed with too many of his performances. He has had some great performances, but, they're against really low-level guys, and, guys like Kyle Bochniak and Austin Arnett, who are pretty much just punching bags. But, diving right into this, matchup, Dawodu, he's got a pretty heavy leg kicking game, very good at mixing it up, front kick to the body, nasty leg kicks. The only thing with him that I don't really like is he's not particularly high output. I mean, he's not low output either, but I think his numbers are definitely inflated from his fights against Austin Arnett and Kyle Bochniak. Again, two guys who are pretty much just punching bags. I feel like his numbers are a bit inflated because of that. And, overall, he really only throws like single strikes at a time. He does throw heavy, but he doesn't really put together combinations well. He does have a decent clinch game, but all in all, I just don't think his striking is all that good. And I do think the judges tend to agree too, because his last two fights went to a split decision, even though he pretty comfortably outstruck both of his opponents. It's just that he will have moments of inactivity, and when he does throw, it's really, just a single strike, even though it is heavy. It's kind of hard to look good when you're really just only throwing the single strike. So a little hard for him to, win on the cards if, his opponent has decent output as well. So that's definitely something to consider there. His takedown defense does seem to check out as well, but I don't think he's really fought a really, high-level grappler or anything. And, as far as Evloev goes, I don't think he's fought like super high level of competition either. He has beaten guys like Nick Lentz and Mike Grundy, who, Nick Lentz is a veteran, and, he's a bit, past his prime, quite a bit past his prime actually, and, he beat him like he should. Mike Grundy starting to look a bit like a bust, honestly. The guy has had a pretty mediocre UFC run, if I'm being honest. His only win being against Nad Narimani, and then kind of dropped the ball against Evloev and Venata. But I guess the verdict is still out on him, but I'm starting to think that Mike Grundy might not actually be that good. Wasn't a pretty close fight against Barzola, but I feel that, in that fight, Barzola had the speed advantage and was giving Evloev a bit of trouble on the feet, but the guy showed good toughness there, was able to gut it out. Anyways, going back to Evloev, the guy is really well-rounded, honestly. I definitely feel he is a bit hyped. I mean, the guy's lines are always pretty juiced, and honestly, it's a bit justified. His striking is on point. He's got really good output, very tight striking. I don't put too much stock in training camps, but he does have a style that's very distinct to Tiger Muay Thai, and it's really hard for me to kind of pinpoint it, but you can kind of see it in the way they fight. Really just no wasted movement, hits with really nasty intent, very efficient with their striking. And I mean, if you just watch fighters like Peter Yan and Shevchenko and even Fiziev, you can kind of get a feel for the way they fight. Like there's a certain flair in the way they strike. So I think that Evloev kind of embodies that a bit. I mean, I don't think he's quite at that level just yet, but you can kind of get a feel for it. He's also got pretty solid grappling as well. Obviously, I think his striking is a bit better, but he has shown he can wrestle, and it's not very high level, but extremely serviceable. And he is someone who is constantly improving. And just all in all, I mean, he's got a very well-rounded game. There's lots to like about him, and I think that at his age, he's definitely going to be making a ton of improvements. So I do see a lot of potential in this guy. And if I'm being honest, I haven't really seen a performance from Evloev that's really blown me away, but what I can say is he's always pretty consistent in there. The guy always shows up. He doesn't have too many holes in his game, and I mean, he always shows up to fight. So while he's not completely blowing me away, he's shown a lot of good things in the octagon. But taking a look at this matchup, I do have to take Evloev here. I think that he's the much more well-rounded fighter. I think he's the much more technical striker, and I do think that he's going to be the better grappler here too. So I think that he should have Dawodu covered pretty much everywhere. I think that if he does decide to go with his grappling, he could have a pretty safe path to victory. But on the feet, I do think that he should be able to beat Evloev, or he should be able to beat Dawodu. I think he could outpoint him pretty easily. Evloev, he's not really like a power puncher or anything. The he's more of like a volume striker, if anything. And, he is pretty durable too. So I think if it does go to a decision, I do favor Evloev quite a bit. And honestly, I don't think that Dawodu is really a big power puncher either. He's only got one knockout win, and that was against Yoshinori Hori, who I think was just coming in short notice. And, the guy was a massive favorite that fight. So I don't know if I can really say that Dawodu's got big power or anything. So I think that this is a pretty safe matchup, if I'm being honest, for Evloev. And I do think that the line is actually pretty justified here. I don't know if there's a ton of value on Evloev right now, just because I feel that this is a decent step up in competition for Evloev, but ultimately I do feel that he should be able to roll here. I just don't really see too big of a path to victory for Dawodu here. Again, the guy isn't like a super high level striker or anything, or even super high output. So, I mean, I do think that Evloev should be able to just outpoint him on the feet, honestly, and really just go to the wrestling if he needs to as well. So yeah, the pick here is Evloev, and as far as betting tips go, I think that Evloev is a pretty safe bet, honestly. I think he could potentially be a parlay piece as well, just because I think there's a pretty good chance he wins this fight. I really don't see Dawodu being, too much of a danger to him on the feet. I don't think Dawodu's got a good enough ground game to really threaten him here either. So, I think that Evloev should be able to take this, and I might be looking to put him in a parlay. And moving right along, we have Lauren Murphy versus Joanne Calderwood, and this line is lined pretty closely here. Near pick'em, Calderwood minus 125, Murphy plus 105, and yeah, this is a mid-level women's MMA fight, and it is very close, like the odds would indicate. Both fighters are, they have a pretty similar style. Murphy, both of them are pretty much strikers. Murphy, she does like to pump the jab out, has decent counter punching, but does get a little wild in exchanges. She's a little flat-footed as well, and she does seem to have a bit of power, but obviously not KO power, but does seem to have some pop in her shots, and I'd say is probably one of the heavy hitters in the division, even though that's probably not saying much. And she is a bit hittable. Her takedown defense is solid, and I have seen her look to wrestle, but again, she is primarily a striker, although she will occasionally mix in the takedowns. And the same could more or less be said about Calderwood, although I do think Calderwood does have a bit more output. I actually think she's the better striker here. She mixes in the kicks a lot better than Murphy. Not as much power though, but extremely high work rate. She's constantly throwing in there. Not the most power, but again, she does have a ton of volume. And just like Murphy, she does mix in the takedowns as well, but is primarily a striker. The only thing I'd say Calderwood is worse at is probably her takedown defense. I've seen her taken down on multiple occasions, been controlled there as well. So I think that Murphy should have the wrestling advantage, although, Murphy's wrestling isn't like super high level or anything. So I do expect Calderwood to be able to stuff a few takedowns, potentially work her way back to the feet. But, if Murphy goes for a very takedown heavy game plan, she could have a bit of success there, but I think for this matchup, it'll primarily be a stand-up fight. But, as far as how this matchup is going to play out, I do favor Calderwood a bit more just because I feel that she is going to be the better striker, and I think that her volume striking will give her the advantage here. I think that Calderwood's got better footwork as well. I do think that she is a bit better on the feet overall. However, I think this fight really can go either way in the sense that, Calderwood, while she does have the volume advantage, I think that Murphy will likely be landing the harder strikes, and this could potentially just come down to what the judges are scoring. If they're favoring the volume over the damage, then Calderwood could get the nod there. Whereas if they like the damage that Murphy's putting out, Murphy could get the nod. And if Murphy is able to mix in a takedown at the end of the round or something like that, she could very well swing the round in her favor. But overall, I am going to side with Calderwood here. I just think that she is the better striker, and I think the volume will play a big factor into it. So the better striking technique and better volume should be able to win her the decision here, but it could really go either way here. So not something I'm super confident in, and not really a fight I'm looking to bet either, because again, with the fight that could go either way like this, I don't think there's too big of an edge on either side. So I'm going to take Calderwood here, but pretty low confidence pick. If anything, maybe look towards the fight goes to decision prop. It's probably going to be juiced like crazy. It's probably going to be like minus 400 by the time the props drop for this fight. But I think that's actually a pretty safe bet. I don't think either fighter's that hits that hard. I don't think there's really finishing upside for either fighter. Neither of them are really like grapplers, so I don't think a submission is going to materialize. And neither of them are like big power punchers. I did say that Murphy is, she could definitely has some sting in her shots, but she's not like a big time finisher. I think she's only got one finish on her record, and I think that's by like submission too. So yeah, I think that there's a good chance this fight goes to decision. It could be a solid parlay piece, but outside of that, I don't think I'm going to be betting this fight. And in the next fight, we have Eryk Anders versus Darren Stewart, and they're running it back. It's a rematch between the two. The last one ended in a no contest because Anders threw an illegal knee to Stewart. And, full disclosure, I did bet Stewart that last fight. He was like minus 180, and I think I put like 2 units on him. So in hindsight, very bad bet. But the rationale going into that was that, I thought Stewart, he would be the better striker, and he honestly would get the better of Anders in most of the striking exchanges. Anders has looked pretty limited in most of the tape that I've seen. I felt that the only way that Anders would have, really won that fight was if he made it a really just grindy sort of fight, and that's kind of what he did. But, there were a lot of other factors as well. I did believe that early in the fight, Stewart was getting the better of Anders in the exchanges, but where Anders had the most success was, holding Stewart up against the cage and honestly just teeing off on him. But, part of the reason I did take Stewart as well was because I felt he was pretty durable. Obviously, that didn't really come through that fight for him. And, that was just really just bad fight IQ, poor decision-making on Stewart's end to just get backed into the cage. Had no urgency to get off the cage either. He was just getting teed off on by Anders there, and Anders was able to clip him and hurt him pretty badly, I think. Stewart was able to, I think, counter him a little bit in there, but, Stewart was just taking way too much damage at that point. And going into this rematch, I don't think my opinion on either two fighters has really changed all that much. The odds have changed pretty drastically, and I don't know if I completely agree with it. I do understand that Anders, he should have gotten the finish last fight, but I definitely think that there are adjustments that Stewart can make to have a lot more success this fight, and I think that he could actually make it really competitive if he's able to make those adjustments. So obviously I feel that for Stewart to have a bit more success, he'd have to look to stay off the fence, stay off the cage, really just look to keep the fight at the center of the octagon, where I think he has still the advantage in the striking. And, I really hope he's been drilling it, because I do think that Stewart should be able to take this, but I really don't know if that's something that, he's been working on. And, he has to be, though, right? Because that's really where Anders was having most of his success. Outside of that, though, I don't really know if there's too much more to break down. I favor Stewart a bit more in the striking. I guess Anders, he's going to have the advantage, when he's looking to clinch up. But outside of that, I really don't think I don't think he's really improved that much. He did come in much better shape for this fight, but overall, I'm still not very high on Anders. Definitely not as high on Stewart anymore either. Not that I was ever too high on him, but yeah, I feel like this rematch should play out pretty closely this time, assuming Stewart doesn't just get backed up to the fence again. And as far as the pick goes, I think I'm just going to side with Stewart here, like I did originally, because I feel that for Anders, he kind of showed his hand, what he wanted to do, what his game plan was, and if Stewart has any sort of game plan coming in to this, I think that he can definitely get the better of Anders here. But again, I don't know if I could trust him to. The guy has historically, not been that great. So this remains to be seen. But I'm still going to side with Stewart here. I'm going to trust him to not make the same mistake twice. But as far as betting tips go, I'm tempted to potentially take a stab on Stewart if the odds get any wider because, again, I do feel this fight should play out a bit closer. I don't think that we're going to get the same results for this fight. Ultimately, I don't know if I could really trust Stewart to make those adjustments. And, if I'm going to make the assumption that he is going to switch up his game plan a bit, I'm probably going to need a better number than plus 130 at the moment. I'd say at least like plus 150. If it gets better than that, I might put half a unit, maybe or even a unit on Stewart. So the pick here is Stewart, but, honestly, I am rooting for Anders here. I think he was robbed of a KO last fight. Anyways, the pick here is going to be Stewart, and I'm not going to look to bet this unless the line gets a little crazy here. So, yeah. Moving right along, we have Drew Dober versus Brad Riddell, and this is actually the fight I'm looking forward to the most. Two high-level strikers. I have a feeling this is going to be an absolute fireworks of a fight. Anyways, Drew Dober, minus 125, Riddell plus 105, and Dober, he's, again, really high-level striker. He's got great footwork, really solid kicking game, great combination punching, great counter punching as well, can fight off the back foot, but he does do his best work when he's pressuring, and I think that's going to be a huge factor here. I think that Dober is likely going to be the one moving forward for most of the fight, really controlling the octagon. The biggest hole in his game, I'd say, is his grappling, and he's time and time again lost to grapplers, and it's actually kind of sad because every time he's built up a bit of momentum or he's gone on a win streak, he ends up losing to a grappler, and that ends up setting himself back a little bit. You have to go all the way back to his fight against Scott Holtzman, won there, beat Jason Gonzalez, and then loses to OAM, who's a wrestler. Was able to put together a 3-fight win streak before running into Beneil Dariush. Loses to Dariush, who, is a grappler himself, and then puts together another 3-fight win streak, and then runs into Islam Makhachev, and obviously Makhachev, really high-level grappler, and, he loses there. And, if history were to repeat itself, he's going to get the win here, get maybe 2 more wins, and then lose to fucking Arman Sarakian or something. But yeah, getting back to Dober here. So the guy's really high-level striker that really just seems to struggle when he's up against a high-level grappler. And, his opponent, Riddell, pretty similar. I mean, really high-level striker as well. Although we really haven't gotten to see his striking on full display since all of his opponents have looked to grapple with him so far in the UFC. But as far as the striking goes, he's got solid counterpunching as well, pretty heavy hands. Does stand a little heavy on the lead leg, and he does have a pretty bad tendency to sometimes, start to wing some of his shots. But overall, he is a really high-level striker as well. And again, his issue is he does tend to struggle a bit against grapple-heavy game plans, although he has won all of his UFC fights. That said, though, none of the guys he's fought are quite at the level of grappling as some of the guys that Dober has fought. So I guess the verdict is still a bit out on Riddell, but from what I've seen so far, I think his defensive grappling is still definitely a work in progress. That said, though, I think this fight will largely stay standing. I mean, we have 2 really high-level strikers here, so I do expect them to strike here. I don't think that either guy is going to go to the grappling, although I wouldn't be completely surprised if one of these guys decided to just kind of test the opponent. But all in all, I do feel that this is going to be a striking fight, and I really hope that it is because if it's a grappling fight, that's really going to be a letdown. But anyways, taking a look at this matchup, it is lined pretty closely, but I do lean more towards Dober. If anyone's following me on Bet MMA tips, you'll see that I've already put a unit on Dober. Overall, I just feel that Dober is the slightly more technical striker. I think that his footwork is a bit better. I think that his striking is a bit tighter. It's a bit sharper. And, I do feel that Riddell does get a little wild sometimes. He does wing some of his punches. And I like the footwork of Dober quite a bit more, honestly. I think that his ring craft is much better than Riddell's. I think he's going to have a lot more success controlling the octagon, really just controlling the pace of the fight. And I think that Dober is the more dynamic striker as well. I think Dober is also much better at mixing it up, and I do favor him quite a bit in terms of the UFC experience. He has a ton more UFC fights than Brad Riddell, and he is or has a much more accredited Muay Thai background as well. So yeah, I do favor Dober quite a bit more, and I kind of get the feeling that this line was lined closer to pick'em, when it opened, was because they kind of saw this on paper. Two high-level strikers, I guess we'll just kind of make it a coin flip fight, but I think that Dober's got much more upside here. I think, again, I do think he's the better striker. He's more experienced, and honestly, I just think he's the better striker. That said, though, Riddell's still really good and will definitely make this a very competitive fight. But again, I just feel that Dober has a lot more upside here. Like, I think at worst this will be a really close fight, unless obviously Riddell just starches him. But I think that overall this will play out pretty competitively. But again, when I say Dober has a lot more upside, and this may be a hot take, and you guys could shit on me if I'm wrong about this, but I think Dober can potentially really just outclass Dober here. And I mean, not to the sense where he's just gonna just dance circles around him, but I definitely do think that he could be potentially a level above Riddell. And if that's the case, I definitely think that Dober is the side here. So for that reason, I am taking Dober here, and I do have a unit placed on him. In fact, I might actually put another half unit on him. I don't know where the line will move, but I wouldn't be surprised if a bit more money came in on Dober, because as it stands now, I think there is still a bit more value on Dober. I think that, again, Dober has a ton of upside. I think at worst this is going to be a pretty close competitive fight. So again, the pick here is Dober, and I do have a unit placed on Dober already at minus 125, and I'm definitely looking to maybe put another half unit on him when I'm done recording this. And moving right along, we have Jamahal Hill versus Paul Craig, and Hill's going to be the minus 285 favorite. Come back on Craig is plus 245. And starting with Hill first, so right off the bat, I mean, this guy's a pretty heavy hitter. He's got a pretty high work rate as well, which is kind of impressive, because a lot of the time with these guys who can hit hard, they don't have the best volume. But Hill, he's got an extremely high work rate. His output is pretty crazy. Although, I don't actually think he has really devastating raw power. He just has pretty quick hands and really good accuracy. So, when he connects, it's pretty devastating. His kicking game is pretty decent. Has a pretty devastating knee up the middle that he likes to throw. And, defensively, though, he does have some pretty bad tendency. He keeps his hands low and is kind of hittable. His takedown defense also isn't that great, but he has shown he can work his way up back to the feet pretty quickly. That said, though, he hasn't really fought a high-level grappler. He was taken down by Stosic, I think 6 or 7 times, but, he was able to get up pretty quickly. That said, though, that is definitely a concern going into this fight against Craig, who, is a really high-level, who has really high-level jiu-jitsu. His wrestling isn't great, but, if he is able to get you to the ground, he is very dangerous there. If he's able to snatch up a limb or something, he could definitely lock in a submission. But as far as Craig's striking, I mean, it's really not great at all. He gets backed up a lot on the feet, is pretty hittable. Will throw a lot of spinning attacks, rather unsuccessfully, but on the feet, he's not very good. But he's a submission specialist, and he will sell out for the takedowns. He will get this fight to the ground pretty much at all costs. He's got pretty decent timing on his double and will really aggressively attack the single leg. And he will pull guard as well, which I'm usually not a fan of. But for someone who's as one-dimensional and is as dangerous as he is on the ground and off his back, I think I can kind of let this slide a little bit, especially since I think he's going to be pretty outclassed on the feet. And, if you're looking to bet Craig, I think you'd rather have him on his back than on the feet against Hill. On the ground, he's very aggressive with looking for the sub, but he will spend large amounts of time on his back if he isn't able to lock in the submission. But taking a look at this matchup, it's very interesting because I give Hill a pretty significant advantage on the feet. I think that if it stays standing, he could definitely knock Craig out. Craig has been knocked out before. Granted, it was against really heavy hitters like Menefield and somebody else I can't remember, but he has been knocked out before. And as far as the grappling goes, though, I give Craig quite a significant advantage there. I think that if he is able to get Hill to the ground and drag this fight on into the later rounds, I definitely think that he's going to be live for potentially a round 2, round 3 sub. But there's just far too many question marks here still in regards to the takedown defense and the jiu-jitsu defense of Hill. His takedown defense hasn't really looked great. And, while he has been able to pop back up to his feet in a lot of occasions, he hasn't really fought a really high level, jiu-jitsu practitioner, and definitely not someone on Craig's level, not someone who will, sell out for the submission or the takedown like Hill will, or like Craig will. So yeah, from a betting perspective, this is pretty much a stay away fight for me. Just because I think that on the feet, Hill has a pretty significant advantage. If he's able to keep it standing, I think he could definitely knock Craig out. But if Craig is able to, hang in there, kind of weather the storm early and really just look to get his grappling game going, he's definitely live for a submission. So on the feet, I favor Hill. I think that he can definitely get the knockout. But on the ground, I definitely favor Craig. I think that he can get the submission there. But if I had to make a pick, I'm definitely siding with Hill here. I think, the fight is going to start standing. And if Craig isn't able to get the fight to the ground, it's going to be rough for him on the feet. So yeah, I'm going to take Hill here, but I don't think I want to bet him just yet. I think the line, it feels a little wide. I mean, he absolutely can look like a minus 300 favorite if he just goes out there and starches Craig, but I think that Hill is still pretty unproven, and there's still a lot of question marks surrounding his game. Like, his offense is looking good, but his defensive striking isn't all the way there, and his defensive grappling isn't completely there either. So the line definitely feels a little wide. I think that if you want to take Craig, maybe just take him by submission, because I really don't think he'll win a decision here, and he's really not going to knock Hill out unless he lands one of those crazy spinning attacks. But those are really low percentage, and he pretty much whiffs on all of them. So if you take Craig, I think Craig by submission isn't a bad look. And if you want a really juicy number, I'd say maybe Craig round 2, round 3 submission, because I don't think that Craig is going to be able to get Hill down early in the fight when Hill is fresh. Maybe when he starts to tire out a little bit and Craig is really able to work his grappling early, kind of just wear him down in the first round, and then potentially lock in the sub in the second or third round when Hill starts to tire a bit. That might be the play there. But as far as money line pick goes, I don't think I want to bet this fight. So just to conclude, I got Hill here, but I don't think I'm going to be betting this fight. In the next fight, we have Belal Muhammad versus Demian Maia, and Muhammad's the minus 220 favorite. Comeback on Maia is plus 185. So Muhammad, he's got pretty good footwork on the feet, got good head movement, good feints, pretty good at stance switching. He's got good combination punching as well, although he is a bit hittable, especially in exchanges. But overall, he is pretty durable. He's got only one knockout loss, I believe, and that was against Vicente Luque, so can't really hold that against him too much. He's got a solid grappling game as well. I mean, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter, but, it's not super elite or anything. It's definitely something he can go to and exploit, if he's going up against a fighter who's not that good, with their takedown defense. So, yeah, all in all, he's a very well-rounded fighter, but, not particularly great at everything. I think he is a better striker than he is a grappler, but that, again, is something that is just a part of his game. And, on the feet, I think he moves pretty well. He's got pretty slick striking, but, I don't think he's going to really blow anyone out of the water. I don't think he has a ton of power either. Yeah, he's got good volume, and he's really good at pressuring, but, I mean, he's not like a crazy, powerful hitter or a really high-level striker or anything. Just a very, very solid, well-rounded guy. His opponent, Demian Maia, I mean, really not much to say here. The guy is a jiu-jitsu specialist. On the feet, he's a little wild. I mean, a lot of the time he's just throwing these heavy overhands, really just looking to close the distance. Very, prototypical of these, high-level jiu-jitsu guys, really just looking to get the fight to the ground, but do get a little reckless on the feet. And, he is pretty aggressive with the single leg. He does like to really just stick onto his opponents and just drag the fight to the ground at all cost. And when it's there, he's very aggressive with the submissions, will look to advance positions, and, just overall is a very high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner, and you can really see it in the way he really starts to work and flow on the mat. And before really digging into this matchup, I thought that Muhammad potentially could be a lock here, but, man, after watching some tape, I got a little more hesitant just because I feel that Maia is still pretty dangerous. And, outside of his loss to Burns, he hasn't actually looked that bad for someone who's, 40 plus years old. I usually do look to fade guys who are, on their way out, a little bit older, coming up against, just younger, solid high-level fighters. And this felt like that, it could be one of those matchups, but I just don't think that Maia is completely done yet. I mean, outside of that knockout to Burns, he has looked pretty solid still. I mean, he was coming off of a win against I think Ben Askren. Let me take a look here. Yeah, against Ben Askren, and then had a win against Anthony Rocco Martin as well, and also a win against Lyman Good. So 3 very solid opponents in 2019 before getting knocked out in 2020. So I do feel that Maia still has got it, but coming off of a pretty nasty knockout loss against Burns, I don't know where he stands physically and mentally. But even before Burns knocked him out, I think he was able to actually get Burns to the ground. Burns was just able to time him coming in and knocked him clean out. So yeah, I definitely do feel that Maia could potentially still be dangerous. I think that obviously he is live for the submission, but he could potentially just grind out a win here too, because Muhammad, he's got solid takedown defense, but I don't think he's fought a grappler quite at the level of Maia. Well, obviously not a jiu-jitsu practitioner at the level of Maia, but I don't think he's fought really any solid wrestlers as well. So I feel like his takedown defense numbers are a bit skewed. So this is a very iffy matchup actually for Muhammad. However, if I did have to take a side here, I would side with Muhammad. I think that he's going to be the better striker on the feet, but this matchup really is going to come down to whether or not Maia could get the takedowns, because if he can, I think he could potentially get the submission. I think that he could also get enough control time to really win on the scorecards also. So, I think there's a couple paths to victory for Maia here. But I will have to side with Muhammad here. I think that, his forward pressure is going to be a bit of an issue for Maia, but the threat of the takedown and the just winging overhands for Maia could kind of make Muhammad a little tentative as well. But yeah, I got to side with the much younger guy here, the guy who's better, on the feet in a fight that starts on the feet. So the pick here is Muhammad, but I would be a little cautious about betting Muhammad here or even putting him in parlays, because I do think that Maia could still potentially be dangerous, and he does have a few paths to victory. So I would be cautious, in putting Muhammad in any parlays. That said, though, I mean, Maia could just completely be washed, and he might not be able to the timing might not be there, and Muhammad might just be able to piece him up. So that could happen, but I don't think it's too likely. For one, I'm not just going to assume that Maia's completely fallen off a cliff just yet. And Muhammad's not really like a power puncher. The guy is, historically a decisionator. So at worst, I think he just pieces up Maia for 3 rounds. But I think Maia could still potentially make this competitive. But again, I'm gonna side with Muhammad here. But I don't think I'll bet this fight. And in the next fight, we have Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz. And Edwards is going to be the minus 450 favorite. Comeback on Diaz is plus 350. Anyways, this is going to be a 5-rounder. I'm not quite sure why they've kept it that way. But yeah, this is going to be a 5-round fight, which is actually pretty interesting. And I think actually works in the favor of... Actually, I'm not too sure. I suppose it's going to be in Edwards' favor, just because I think that, both guys have pretty solid cardio, but you know what? I don't know. I don't know who this favors, but it's just interesting that this is a 5-round fight. Anyways, Leon Edwards, he's got a solid jab, a great one too. Striking is pretty simple, but effective. Very meat and potatoes. Have seen him struggle a bit with leg kicks, and as far as grappling goes, he does have a pretty solid body lock takedown. He's got decent top control, not super busy there though. His wrestling is definitely something I've seen him go to a bit more recently, and it's definitely been a part of his game for quite a while now, and I feel that it is something that he is improving fight to fight from. It definitely isn't like his strongest point, but he has shown a lot of improvement there. But where I feel like he does his best work is in the clinch. I mean, the guy's got fantastic timing on those clinch elbows, very dangerous, clinch knees as well. And, the guy just does a ton of damage there. He'll even look to, time clinches after exchanges. I mean, the guy's just fantastic at slicing up people's faces with his elbows in the clinch. So overall, I think he is a really solid fighter, very well-rounded. And, the crazy thing is he's only 29 years old. For some reason, for the longest time, I thought he was in his, early, mid-30s or something. But, yeah, he's still very young, making a lot of improvements. And He was coming off a relatively long layoff, but I feel like he's shaken off a little bit of the rust against, what's his name, Muhammad. Although, he only got about like a round and a half of, cage time in there. So I'm not sure how much that'll affect him here, but, I don't think it's going to matter too much because Diaz has had an even longer layoff. And, while we're on that topic, let's move right along to Nate Diaz here. So, yeah, again, he's been pretty inactive and has a ton of fight miles on him. The guy's accumulated a ton of wear and tear on his body. He really likes to pressure his opponents, has really unorthodox striking, really has that patented 1-2, very just in-your-face sort of style, very attritional, very scrappy. I mean, if you've watched him fight, you'll know what I'm talking about. And, he's a bit of a fan favorite for that reason. He's got really solid jiu-jitsu as well, but I'm just not really sure how he wins this fight, outside of potentially catching Diaz or catching Edwards. But yeah, I don't know if there's really too much to break down here. Diaz, he's coming off like a near year and a half long layoff, and he was coming off a pretty bad beatdown by Jorge Masvidal. And before that, he did get a win off Anthony Pettis, but this was a Pettis that was on a pretty significant decline. But outside of that, I mean, he's had a pretty long time off, and I just think he's obviously way past his prime, but I just don't think he's really going to be that dangerous here. Unless he's able to catch Edwards in a freak submission or is able to somehow clip him coming in, I just don't see Diaz offering too much anywhere for Edwards, honestly. I mean, we have Edwards who is, honestly in the prime of his career. The guy's on an upswing. He's a potential title challenger, and, Diaz, he's clearly on his way out. I mean, I don't know. I just have a really hard time seeing how Diaz wins this. Overall, I really just see Edwards having Diaz just completely outgunned everywhere. I think he's going to be the much stronger, much more athletic, much more physical fighter. I'd say outside of maybe like jiu-jitsu, the jiu-jitsu realm. I think that Edwards should be able to just kind of bully Diaz in there. And, I wouldn't even be surprised if Edwards got the KO stoppage just because, Diaz, he has a ton of scar tissue. And, when Edwards is landing those elbows, I think he's not going to have a hard time cutting Diaz open. And, come the third or fourth round, he's probably going to be busted open pretty badly. And I think I said it before in his fight against Muhammad, he is due for a stoppage, just because I feel like in a lot of his fights, he's actually cutting open his opponents, and they're usually a pretty bloody mess in there. And I think he is due for a doctor stoppage, and I think this fight could be it. So yeah, obviously I do have Edwards here, and I do have him parlayed up with Mason Jones from the previous week. Obviously, at the time of recording this, the Mason Jones fight hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping that cashes. I'm hoping this cashes, and I do have a 4.5 unit bet placed on these guys. I think there's a good chance both of these guys catch. But if not, I might end up just throwing Edwards in another parlay because I really feel that Edwards, he should be able to take this. I mean, this is a pretty solid matchup for him. This is as close to a lock as possible, I think. So yeah, the pick here is Edwards, and I do have him in a parlay. Not sure if I want to use him to anchor another parlay at all, but I do think that Edwards is a pretty safe play. And in the co-main event, we have the rematch between Deiveson Figueiredo versus Brandon Moreno. And Figueiredo is a minus 250 favorite. Comeback on Moreno is plus 210. And I'm just going to break down these fighters really quickly, even though they did match up already before. But Figueiredo's, has got pretty crazy power for the division. I remember seeing a pretty crazy stat about him. I think his knockdown per 15 minutes or something is on par with Ngannou's. And obviously, I think it's not quite as close anymore now that he had a 5-round war with Moreno. But just a pretty crazy number for someone in that division. He's pretty unorthodox on the feet, likes to back opponents down and just unleash heavy shots on them. His output is decent, but it's not the highest. But again, all of his shots are very impactful. He does a ton of damage with them, so he's able to get away with that quite a bit. His takedown defense and scrambling is pretty solid as well. I think the only person that was really able to have a lot of success in the grappling against him was Formiga, and Formiga's a really solid fighter as well. And supposedly Figueiredo, he was hurt that fight as well, but his opponent Moreno, pretty unorthodox striking as well, really solid counter punching, but he does rely on his chin quite a bit. He's got decent scrambling and, just a pretty well-rounded defensive grappling game as well. His output is solid. Pretty good cardio. Not a ton of power, but, he's a bit more of an attritional volume sort of striker. And, taking a look at this matchup, I honestly don't see it playing out too much differently from the first fight. I feel that on the feet, Figueiredo is just going to be landing the much heavier shots. And Moreno did land clean on Figueiredo a few times and did kind of bust up his face a bit. But as far as optics go, it definitely looked like Figueiredo was landing, much harder, much more impactful shots. And the issue with Moreno is he's just far too hittable against someone like Figueiredo. Even though Moreno is very tough, very durable, eating all that damage just doesn't look good on the scorecards. And eventually, the chin is going to crack. I don't know if it'll happen this fight, but just taking that much punishment is definitely not good. Going into the first fight, I thought that Figueiredo would have the advantage, in the power, and Moreno would have the advantage in the volume. But looking at some of the numbers and rewatching that fight, Figueiredo was able to match the pace of Moreno pretty well while, again, landing the heavier shots. So I'm just not seeing what Moreno could potentially do to make things a bit closer for him. And, if it wasn't for the point deduction, I think that Figueiredo should very clearly have won that fight. And I guess, for Moreno to have success, he'd probably have to go to his grappling a little more, really look to tire out Figueiredo, because Figueiredo, again, ton of power. And, I guess Figueiredo is a little bit hittable as well. The guy, for as much damage as he dishes out, he does actually take quite a bit of damage as well. So, I definitely think that Moreno can make it close, but again, it'll just come down to the power of Figueiredo. And, if they're both exchanging, I definitely think that Figueiredo is going to be the one that comes out ahead in a lot of those exchanges. So, unfortunately, not a crazy in-depth breakdown. I think we've kind of seen this fight play out once already. I don't think it'll be too much different. If anything, I think Figueiredo might have a more dominant performance because supposedly he was dealing with some sort of virus or something, some stomach virus going into that fight, was not coming in 100%, and still put on a pretty solid performance. I think that if he's coming in good shape this fight, he should be able to do quite a bit of damage on Moreno. So, the pick here is Figueiredo, but as far as a bet goes, I don't know if I really want to bet this fight just because Moreno did actually make it pretty close, and just because I can't think of any adjustments he could make doesn't mean his camp hasn't thought of something that he could do to make this fight a lot closer or potentially even win this fight. So I'm going to stick with Figueiredo here, although I do think that Moreno can make it very competitive. So the pick is Figueiredo, and no bet just yet. I think I'll just sit back and really enjoy this fight. This is going to be a good one. And in the main event, we have Israel Adesanya versus Marvin Vettori, the rematch, the third rematch on the card, actually. So Adesanya can be had for -240, Vettori for +210. And let's start with Adesanya first, the champ. So this probably goes without saying. The guy's got elite striking. You're probably going to hear this all throughout fight week, but, he's got very good footwork, very good use of feints. He stays very calm, very composed in there. Very accurate striking, great counter striking as well. I mean, just all around, really just elite striker. The guy is probably the best striker in the UFC at this point. Really not much more to add here. I mean, there's probably dozens of guys on YouTube that could break down his striking way better than I can. But as far as his takedown defense and everything else goes, it kind of checks out. Does seem competent off his back, will work his way back to the feet. So the fight against Jan most recently, I feel, is a bit of an outlier. I don't think you can take too much from his performance there because at the end of the day, Vettori or Adesanya didn't move up that fight, and he was giving up a good amount of size, good amount of strength in that fight, and once he got taken down by Jan in that fight, he wasn't really able to work his way back up. Looked pretty bad off his back, but in his first fight with Vettori, he was actually pretty good at digging underhooks and working his way back up to the feet. And while we're on that topic, I actually want to talk about their first matchup. And, a lot of people are going to say that Adesanya very clearly won that fight, but I don't know if I agree. I do think that he won, but it was a much closer fight than I think people give Vettori credit for, because just rewatching that fight, I think the only round that you could really score convincingly for Izzy is that second round. And the first round I thought was pretty close. I definitely think that, Adesanya, he edged it out that first round. But, upon rewatch, it definitely looked like Vettori started off much stronger. I think that if Adesanya didn't have a bit of hype, I think if he just looked at that fight from a vacuum, you could definitely make a bit of an argument for Vettori. I'm not saying he won that first round, but I do think that first round was really close. And then I think that third round, I would say Vettori won. So, that was actually a much closer fight than I remembered it being. Anyways, I just wanted to kind of touch up on that before moving on. And taking a look at his opponent, Vettori. So Vettori, he's a very well-rounded fighter. Not too many weaknesses, but I don't think he's particularly like elite or high level anywhere. His striking is solid, but he's not like a super high level striker. He likes to pressure his opponents, but his punches, they're a bit loopy. He's kind of aggressive and will put combinations together, but he's not as good on the back foot. And he really does his best work when he's the one pressuring and moving forward. And he is able to mix in the wrestling as well. He's got a good single leg, but most of his takedowns are actually against the fence. He's got decent top control. His jiu-jitsu is pretty solid as well. Just a very well-rounded fighter. But, taking a look at this matchup, I honestly don't see it being too different from the first fight, at least for the first 3 rounds. I think that Vettori, he'll likely start off, aggressive. Izzy, he's usually taken the first round and a half or so to really get a read on his opponents. So for that reason, I think that Vettori could potentially steal the first round. But even then, Izzy, he's still pretty active. He's just not as aggressive as he is in the later rounds when he starts making his read on his opponents. I definitely think that Vettori is going to try and mix in the wrestling because I really think that he'll have to do that to really get the respect of Izzy on the feet. Otherwise, if it's just a kickboxing match, Izzy's going to pretty much just pick him apart. And that's kind of what I expect to happen at distance. I think Izzy's just going to, he's going to throw his feints. He's going to use his footwork to, maintain distance. Izzy's distance management is on point. He's going to work his kicks, really just look to outpoint Vettori on the feet. And, as the fight starts to progress, I see Izzy starting to land a bit more, really get his timing down. And I wouldn't be completely surprised if, he was able to get the finish in the later rounds. But, Vettori, he's cast iron and he's not super reckless or anything when he's going in. So I don't think that Izzy will catch him. He could, but I think that, Vettori could stay relatively safe, but, if he does that, I really don't think he'll have a good chance of winning. I actually think that for Vettori to win, obviously, got to implement the wrestling and actually maybe just move in, bite down on the mouthpiece and really just, swing some bombs at Izzy, really kind of fluster him a little bit because, you can't really fight a technical, kickboxing match against Izzy. He'll pick him apart. So, as far as the pick goes, I definitely have to side with Adesanya here. I just have a really hard time seeing a very clear path to victory for Vettori. I think for Vettori to win, he'll really have to have a really dominant wrestling performance because, if he isn't able to put a stamp on the fight, I don't think he's going to be winning a decision here. And something I kind of wanted to mention, which, I feel is kind of significant, is what these guys have done after their first fight, right? So with Adesanya, he's gone on to become champ, but you look at the fighters he's gone up against, pretty high level guys throughout, right? So, after his fight with Vettori, he went up against Brad Tavares, who, not super high level, but decent gatekeeper, top 15 sort of guy. Derek Brunson, who's definitely top 10 at this point, possibly even top 5. That might be a bit of a stretch, but definitely top 10 for sure. Anderson Silva, not the best win ever, but just some name value there. Calvin Gastelum, who say what you want about Gastelum, but the guy's got really solid striking, and that was a fantastic fight. And then Robert Whittaker, clearly the number 2 guy in the division, without a doubt. Yoel Romero, a bit of a snooze fest, but was able to pretty comfortably outpoint him there. And then Paulo Costa ended him in the second round there, and then went on to fight Jan Blachowicz, moving up a division, the champ there. So the resume of Adesanya since their last fight, since the last meeting, pretty impressive. Whereas with Vettori, he went on to fight Cesar Figueiredo. Don't think he's with the promotion anymore. Andrew Sanchez, who, is a mid-level grappler. Carl Roberson, low-level guy, bottom of the barrel almost, like barely UFC caliber sort of guy. Jack Hermanson, probably his best win in there, so, I'll give him credit there. And then Kevin Holland, who, no takedown defense Kevin Holland, short notice Kevin Holland, was able to dominate him, on the ground for 5 rounds. But, even on the feet, Holland was giving him trouble. And people are going to say that, if Holland was able to give Vettori trouble, that Adesanya should be able to smoke him in there. I don't think that's the case. I think that he could definitely keep it close. In fact, I think that, this fight should be actually pretty close. I think that Adesanya, he is, he could potentially get the knockout, but I think more likely than not, he'll win the decision here. I think that mainly just because I think that Adesanya, he's a really good counterpuncher, but he doesn't really move forward unless he's got you hurt. So that could happen, but I think it's more likely he gets the decision. Anyways, back to my point here. I'm just trying to say that Vettori, his best win since beating Adesanya or losing to Adesanya was Jack Hermanson, who is he's a great fighter, but outside of that, his resume hasn't looked that great. Granted, the guy's had a number of fights fall through, so can't hold that against him too much. But ultimately, I just feel that Adesanya's faced the much higher caliber level of opposition since they've last fought. So for that reason, I got to take Adesanya here. And as far as betting tips go, I think the line is pretty fair. Honestly, I think that if anything, honestly, the line is pretty fair here. Maybe if you had to press me for value side, maybe Adesanya, just because I really have a hard time seeing a very clear path to victory for Vettori. So yeah, the pick here is going to be Adesanya, and I have him winning by decision. And that will conclude another episode of the podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed that. Hope you guys found some of the analysis useful. And if you did, please hit that like and subscribe. Anything helps. I really appreciate it. And, I hope you guys cash on your next bets. And I'll see you next week.